You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.
To Fika. Our guest today is Julia Brannan. Julia is the author of the Jacobite Chronicles, a historical fiction series that begins in 1742 and is based on the Jacobite Rebellion. But there's more to these novels. I found the first in the series, Mask of Duplicity, scrolling social media, looking at the book ads. Upon seeing it was free, I thought, what do I have to lose? As usual, and began to read. And I'm still reading into Book 3, The Gathering Storm. I didn't get a free book. I got a free ticket to adventure and intrigue, another world, and another life. Thank you for that ticket, Julia, and welcome to Fika.
Thank you very much. It's wonderful to be here.
I was wondering if the first thing you could do is give us a little background on the series so our listeners and viewers have a better idea of what we're talking about later on.
Okay. The series there's actually a series of 6 books, which I called the Jacobite Chronicles, and they deal with the final Jacobite rising in Scotland and England. It was an attempt by Prince Charles Edward Stuart, commonly known as Bonnie Prince Charlie, which a lot of people may know of him by that name, to invade, effectively, Scotland and then move on down into England and take back the throne of Great Britain for his father, James. The Stuarts had been exiled from the throne in 1689. And they'd made various attempts to get back. And this was the final one that almost succeeded. So the series covers the build-up to that, the actual rebellion itself, and then the aftermath, which was a big thing in Scotland particularly.
And, yes, because a lot of rules and laws were applied to them after.
Yes, they were. Yeah, it was effectively the end of the Highland Scottish culture at the time.
And then you have several other novels that go along with that have background stories for the different characters.
Yeah, after I finished the main series, I decided I was going to write another series going back to the very start of the whole rising in the 1680s, excuse me, to explain why that happened. And then when I started looking at that, I realised I'd have to do an incredible amount of historical research before I could write. So I thought, well, I can't just write nothing for years because this is how I make my living. So I thought, I know, what I'll possibly do is I might write the backstories of some of the minor characters from the books. And that's effectively what I've ended up doing. I've written 4 of them. And there's a 5th one that's I'm partway through now. And then I'll start the next series after I finish this.
So if you are interested in the series, you know that you're not going to read one and then have to wait 2 years for the next one to come out. There's like 10 books already out there for you to read concerning this. Okay, so obviously you have a history. You have a past. You have a history for a passion on history, and but what drew you to the Jacobite uprising in particular?
Well, it sort of started around 1993. So when I was younger, I worked for the civil service, and I suddenly woke up one day and thought, I do not want to suddenly be 80 and people say, what have you done with your life? And I say, I worked in an office for 40 years and then retired. So I had a great life change and I gave up my job, split up with my boyfriend at the time, and I went travelling. And I started off by going to Scotland, and I was driving around Scotland, not really knowing much about the Highlands at all. And I drove past this field in the evening. It was raining and it was dull, and there was it was a big boggy field with a red flag and a yellow flag. And I stopped and thought, wonder what that is. And I ended up wandering around this horrible, boggy, heather-covered field, wondering what it was. The visitor centre was shut. And then I started to become really, really low and depressed for no good reason, because I was just starting a 6-month trip around Europe. And I just felt, I don't know, I felt terrible. I felt really unhappy and angry, and I couldn't understand it. And I thought, I don't like this place. So I got in the car and drove away, and I thought, I must find out more about what that place is properly. And then, of course, I did 6 months around Europe, so I forgot all about it. And then years later, literally 10 years later, I started thinking about writing. I've always wanted to be a writer, and life took over, and I didn't. And I was looking for subjects to write about. So I'd done a little bit of historical research into the Tudors. And then I wrote an absolutely horrible novel that will never be published anywhere about the Tudors. And I sent it off to various agents around the country. And while I was waiting for an agent to say, this is the best thing we've ever seen, I decided to do some family history research. And my Gordon clan, I'm from the Gordon clan, my Scottish side. And I was trying to find out why my Gordon family moved from Scotland to Ireland at a time when you wouldn't do that for prosperity, particularly if you were a Catholic, and they were. And then they came back again in the 1830s. And I thought, well, something must have caused them to move, possibly something historical, something that happened. So I started researching the 18th century to find out what happened in the 18th century. And I got completely obsessed with it because it's an absolutely fascinating whole century in British history when so much happened, and authors don't write about it. They write about, Charles II and all his mistresses, and then they just carry on in Jane Austen's time, and they miss the whole century out.
It's like,
I don't believe this.
Yeah, no, I'm reflecting on what you're saying, and it is true.
Yeah, and so, and then when I read about the Battle of Culloden, I realised that was the gloomy, dark, miserable place that I'd been to that had made me so unhappy. And I read a bit more into it and realised that could possibly have been why my family cleared off. Or not. I don't know. I probably never will know because the records have not survived. But I became really interested in that period, and then I decided that while I was waiting for my Tudor novel to become famous, I'd start and write one little romantic book about the Jacobite Rising. And then as I did more and more research, it just exploded out into this whole series.
Well, this isn't. I didn't warn you about this. But I'm throwing it in. With that book, I was like, okay, so I feel that it's supposed to be a romance, and it is. There are romance in the book, but I don't feel that's like the strongest part of the book. And then I looked back, and I'm going to check this, and you have historical fiction on your website for it. So yes, the romance is there, but it's not like a typical romantic historical novel as I see it. No. I see the history being more of the story.
Yeah, it is. And when I look at the ratings on Amazon, it's usually around about the same ratings for historical romance and historical fiction. But I've always been wary of publicising it under historical romance, because a lot of historical romance readers expect the primary focus of the book to be about the romance, and then there's usually a happy ever after ending at the end of the book. And of course that doesn't happen because there's 6 books in the series, but it is around the love story is the driving focus, and the history. And I did have some really scathing reviews from historical romance readers.
I noticed those.
This is terrible, and I thought, oh God. So I decided not to publicise it under historical romance, because I didn't want to mislead people into picking it up, and then if it's not what they want, then they're not going to like it, So
I was at the end of the first one, and I thought, wait a minute. Okay, I'm more interested in, not that it's the growth that the characters go through because of the time, I think. Yeah. So it's not separated. It's more realistic. and possibly in some romantic views, realistic is not what they're going for. But I enjoyed it. I was just trying to, classify it, and it wouldn't be classified. So I'm like, okay, historical fiction it is. That's what Julia has on her site. That's what I'm going with.
Well, it is a romance as well, though. I mean, there's romance in there, but I don't. I wanted my characters to develop because people do. I mean, I hate it when you get a character that starts off and they're a certain way, and then they go through this absolute hell and various different things, and aliens landing and being spirited off and things, and then at the end of the book they're exactly the same person. And I think nobody would be like that. If you go through all those events, it changes you.
Yes, you need that
You know.
curve, and particularly if you're reading a series. Like, I can already see going into book 3, how the characters are growing because of the times, because of life, and because of each other. And you
Yeah.
can see that
Yeah.
growth already taking place, and I think that's much more realistic. So, I mean, I want to see them grow. Character growth is important to me. Otherwise,
Yeah,
why
and
read
you'll
the
see
book?
that even more with the backstories because all the backstories start with them as children.
Yes, I'm
So
I'm waiting. I'm being so good. No, I want the backstory now. And so far I've been good, but after this no one will know. So if if I go back and read the backstories first. I mean, because there's no spoilers, they're backstories, right?
no, there's not. The backstories are they're separate. I mean, they show how the character becomes what they are at the start of the series. So the only thing I would say, if you're reading the backstories, you can read them in any order, but read Harriet's book before Caroline and Philippa's because Harriet's story continues in Caroline and Philippa's. So if you're reading, but you can read the others any way you want, and you won't get spoilers. Quite a few people that have read the series and then read the backstories have said now they're going to go back and reread the series because all of a sudden it's much richer for them.
Because they
So,
know what they were like as children and what made them who they are.
and what made them who they are, yeah, which you
Yes.
obviously don't know from the chronicles because they're already whoever that
As
person, but they develop within the chronicles as well.
I like that full service that you're doing, Julia. This is the whole story. Vicky doesn't have to sit there and wonder, I wonder why that is, and come up with different ideas of what made them the way they are.
I think it's. I mean, a lot of people think that I've got a degree in history or something, and I actually gave up history as a subject when I was 13 at school because I hated it. And the reason I hated history at school was because all we learnt about was, well, the Battle of Hastings took place in 1066 and William the Conqueror defeated Harold, and then in 1086, blah blah blah. And I thought I was bored. I wanted to know, why did William the Conqueror do that? And what did Harold think? And what about all the people? And because it's the people that make the history and not the dates. So, and when I've read some historical novels, and they're all about the historical events and the characters are like little cardboard. I don't want that, but I want how the people. So it's always the people I've been more interested in, which is probably why I've put so much work into the characters themselves to try and make them real to their period, but not alienate 21st century readers from them, which is really difficult.
Um, some readers will be alienated whether you, no matter what you do.
Yeah.
But uh, but the thing is that people are different. So there are people who want those dates and want it spread out in front of them, but there are other people who want that human element. And when you get something personal in the story, like you did, you went there, you found your family connection and went on from there. That passion is going to grow, and that's not going to happen at 13 usually, right?
Yeah.
And that's why we have a whole life to learn and be curious.
I know, it's great, isn't it?
It's fantastic. You will never know everything. I'm sorry, people. You will never know everything.
Apparently, you technically could a long time ago. It was possible to know everything, but it isn't anymore.
Well, because every time you learn something, I'm like you've done all this research on the Jacobite rebellion, and now you're saying, just going back a few years, you have all this research ahead of you to do the beginning of the uprising.
Yeah, because it's not just once I've done the research into the events, I thought, okay, if I'm going to write books about this. I mean, I'd already realised that my amazing Tudor novel was actually terrible, and the best thing about it was the title, and so it got rejected everywhere, and I pulled it out. And then I thought, if I'm going to actually write about this period, I need to feel as though I'm living in it, because if I sit down and say, hey, John walked in the room, he had a pair of jeans on and a t-shirt, you know what a pair of jeans and a t-shirt are. But if I say he had stockings and breeches and around his neck he wore a leather stock, you won't know what that is. So I've got to know what that is, and I've got to be able to write about it in a natural way and without stopping every 15 sentences to go, oh God, what did they wear? So I had to I read an awful lot of general background information about the normal way of life, which isn't always easy to get hold of, so that I could actually sit there and write and feel as though I was in the period when I was writing about it, and not think he sat down, oh God, what did he sit on? Did he sit on a chair with a
There
cushion?
goes another, like panic. No, and that's what an important thing about your work that I want to share is that your book invites the person into that world, and you can feel that almost at the beginning. Like when you read a lot, there are books that you're sort of like, oh, I don't know. But I felt like you were comfortable in the writing of it, and therefore I felt comfortable in the reading of it. It went smoothly. It wasn't as I put later on. We were supposed to be discussing this, but we'll discuss it now, Julia.
Okay.
Because we can do that. Sometimes when you get a historical novel, you know that they've done their research because they present it to you. Okay, there's not a grocery list, but you can see the list unfolding as you read. You don't do that. You weave the tale around the knowledge so that it merges and it just seems more natural. You're not showing us the history and all that you know, although I'm sure you're very proud of it. It doesn't come out in the book, and it's just a natural thing. You have a talent for doing that. So tell us, have you always had a talent for doing that, or is that something you work at?
I don't know that. Well, I don't know if I've always had a talent for doing it. I just know that when I've read historical fiction, there's a few things that have really annoyed me about reading various historical fiction, and one is when the characters, the characters are all at dinner or something. There's a side 10 pages about what's going on at that moment in history, and it just drags you straight. 1 minute you're at dinner with a load of people, and the next minute you're going, "What the hell's this?" This
is where I go.
Yeah, exactly. And you don't read it, and then you think, "God, that's boring." And so, and the other one is where I mean, I don't know about you, but if I'm sitting around a dinner table with some friends, I might say, "Hey, what do you think about Joe Biden and Donald Trump and whether he'll do the next election, or about Boris Johnson?" And and we'll talk about him. I won't say, "Oh, Boris Johnson, the leader of the Conservative Party since such a time, who was the Prime Minister." You wouldn't do that at a dinner party. So it sounds false if you do it in a historical novel. Yeah, you've got to get across who that character was, because nobody knows who he was. Whereas, everyone who knows who Donald Trump is, or Boris Johnson possibly. So you've got to try and get it across in a more realistic way. And yeah, it is hard to do sometimes, and make it sound just like general conversation. But if you don't, again, it pulls the reader right out, because you suddenly think, well, why would they wouldn't do that? They wouldn't explain something that everybody knows already at the table.
I think it shows a great respect for the reader, and I understand it takes a lot, like probably doubling down on the editing as well. But I appreciate that you do that, and I'm sure that your other readers do as well. Okay.
Well, nobody said they don't anyway.
Well, I'm saying they do. Okay.
If you want to read about the dates and the events of the Jacobite Rising, you can buy a non-fiction book.
And
that will tell you all about it. If I'm writing a novel, I'm trying to make it alive. I'm trying to make it come to life in a real way so that you're identifying with the individual characters. And if I suddenly
exactly.
give you historical non-fiction 10 pages, you're going to be bored with it. I would be. So
No, no. That being said, Julia does have a small section on the Jacobite Rising at the very beginning of her book to get that out of the way with all the details. So if you're interested, you can read that. Another kindness she gives the readers is the story so far. As we do see on many television series, and she will update you on each of the books before that. However, she and I suggest that you really do read the books before that, and there's no reason for you not to read Mask of Destiny, Mask of Duplicity, because it's free. Okay, so go read that book. So read them in order, but if you happen to just pick something up or along the way, there will be an explanation. Now, Mr. Reiner, Brian has a question. Hello, Brian. Welcome to Fika. After all your research into historical ways of living, does anything strike as something the modern world has lost from those days?
Oh, wow. That's a good question. I think I don't know whether they were or not, but I think possibly being satisfied with less, not needing to be continuously stimulated by brand new things all the time. And I've seen that a little bit when I've done a lot of traveling, and I've spent 3 months trekking in the Himalayas in Nepal. And I didn't just go on the main tourist routes. I went off route as well and went to some really tiny places where hardly anybody goes and stayed in houses with the people. And they were quite happy to just sit outside if they weren't busy working and look at the beautiful view and enjoy that, being in that moment with that view. And I think that's something a lot of us have lost now, particularly in the last years since the internet. It's that we've got to be constantly stimulated with new, colourful, exciting things, and we've lost the ability to just appreciate smaller things as well. And I think possibly I might be being romantic about it because they probably worked so hard to keep themselves from starvation. They didn't have a lot of time, but I think they probably did have more time to listen to each other and to sit and just appreciate that moment. It was slower. Life was slower in many ways.
No, I'm hearing you because, I mean, especially if you're going to do all that work to prepare whatever food you have, and it's not just coming in, you're definitely going to sit down together and eat it. And so leading to more conversations around the table, the idea of a dinner party, just to talk and things like that. So I can see what you're saying. Definitely. Now, you do a lot of research. What is your favorite way of researching, or the one you get the most out of? On site, going and seeing the plays, reading about the plays, watching videos, talking to others? All of it together?
Yeah, all of it together. I mean, when I started researching the Jacobite stuff around about 2006. And at that time, one, I didn't have much money at all, and two, Amazon and so on, the internet wasn't huge at the time, and it was dial up and it cost a fortune and it was really hard to get anything. So at that point, all my research was from books, all of it. So I lived in Wales in a little village near a town called Ystrygynlais, which you don't want me to spell for you. And they had a little village library there. So I used to go in and I had a library ticket that allowed me to get 20 books out. And I would go in and I would order books. If I would go into their catalogues and order books that sounded interesting, anything to do with the 18th century. And these books would come in from all over the place. And I would read the whole book because, oh, cough, I'm going to cough in a minute, I think. Excuse me. I would try and read the whole book because that's what I generally do, is read whole books if I can. And I've lost my track because I've got a terrible tickle in my throat, and any minute I'm going to cough.
We were where? Okay.
Yeah. Can I go
me?
off just for a second?
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes.
please.
Okay. We'll hide you. Okay. Julia will be right back. We are aware that this might happen because she has a cough, and it happens, and it's live, and we were already scheduled. So I appreciate that she came on to speak with us. And I just want to say, these novels are amazingly researched. They read smoothly, and I have enjoyed the three that I have read so far. So I encourage you to check out Mask of Duplicity. Just go on any of the platforms and it's up there for free. I think that we're just about ready to come back. Maybe. she's she's having a drink there, and I promised her that I would entertain you if such a thing happened. Okay, headphones are back on, and the thumb is up.
Hello, sorry
there
about
we
that.
are. I'll explain to them that you were gracious enough to still do the show despite feeling a little under the weather. So we truly appreciate that.
Hopefully I'll be all right now. I've managed to quell this tickle, but when it comes on, it's really bad, and I don't want to be coughing that bad down people's ears. Right, so at one point with this library situation, I ordered so many books that I was responsible for a third of their revenue for the year. They told me that. And but what was difficult about that, of course, was that if I started writing, then I thought, oh, I wonder what about this. I used to have to go down to the library and order a book and wait for 2 weeks for it to arrive, and so it made it much more difficult to write. And I mean, I remember going in once, and I thought, you'll know because you've read The Mass Revealed, and I went in and said, right, do you have any books about what somebody looks like when they're being hung? And they all gave each other a weird look, and then they found a book. And I took it home, and it was a horrendous book. I mean, it was basically telling you what people look like when they're dying in various different ways.
I was so caught up in the story, I didn't even think about you researching that.
Yeah, and so it's about what you look like if you've been hit with an axe, and what you look like if you've been drowned, and so on, and drug overdoses, and what you look like if you're being hanged. And I went back to the library with this book after a while, and I thought, God, it's a really sick sort of book. And I said, who the hell would want to read a book like this? And they all looked at me, and I thought, okay, yeah,
you.
But and then when the internet started to get some traction, that made it easier, because it meant that if I suddenly thought, oh God, what sort of teaspoon did they use, I could just stop and look it up. So the internet is really valuable now, but you've got to be very careful with it, because there's a lot of misinformation on the internet as well. So I won't just look it up on Wikipedia. I'll go off and research somewhere else as well. And then the visits. I mean, initially I couldn't do visits. I lived in Wales, which was, 400 miles from the Scottish border, and I couldn't afford to just get up and disappear and go places. I had a job as well. So, but when you can do that, that can be really interesting, particularly if you go to places where there aren't many people there. So I've had great experiences when I went to my local castle is Huntly Castle, and there was a load of people doing a demonstration about weaponry from the late 17th century. So I went along there, and there was hardly anyone there. So I waited and then got talking to them. And if you get talking to people when they've not got many tourists around and they really know their stuff, they love to share it.
Oh.
And they told me all sorts of really interesting stuff. You can't get that in books. So I ended up getting to fire a pistol across Huntly Castle, which was great.
And that's a feeling you can put into the book that you can't just from reading.
I actually changed a whole scene in one of my books. I was writing Harriet's story at the time, and I changed a whole scene in the books because I asked them a question about what would happen if somebody was shot in a particular way, and they told me, and I changed the scene because of it. And like I said, you can't get that from a book. So I think each different source of historical information gives you a different thing. But the internet has been fantastic.
Right.
I mean, it really has.
Online gives you fast and it gives you
Yeah.
different options. It gives you a direction. The books give you in depth and that time to really think while you're reading. And in real, I'm going to say in real life, gives you the feelings, the physicality of it.
Yeah, and I mean, you get some. I had a great experience last year when there's a local reenactment group called Highlanders for Hire, who are really nice people as well. And they posted on Twitter that they just had a weekend of really intensive training in learning new movements. And unknown to me, both me and another author who lives not far away called Maggie Craig, who writes books about the Risings as well, um, she we both asked independently, oh, was there any video of you learning these moves? Because that could be interesting for us if we're writing a battle scene. And they ended up coming down to her house. And I went over there and they spent a whole day in the garden. And they went through
Oh, that's
all these
fabulous.
moves. Yeah, it was incredible. They went through all these moves very slowly, explaining them. And then they speeded it up a bit and then a bit more. And I was taking video and pictures, and then they were just talking to me, telling me. And we've ended up becoming friends now. I've seen them a few times. That's breathtakingly wonderful when you can get that sort of
Yes,
thing.
yes. You have.
That comes when you're a little bit more well known, you know. So
yes,
I mean,
yes,
yeah.
they'll make it. They'll make it. So I just wanted to let you know that Susan. Hi, Susan. Susan is listening, and she's finding this very interesting.
Good.
So just for a little confidence.
Oh, that's nice. Because I don't know. This is yeah. I don't know if I'm interested or not.
This is Julia's very first radio interview, and honestly, she's slamming it. She's doing better than I am. She's slamming it. You're doing fantastic, Julia. So I just wanted to give you that little halftime call
Thank
out
you.
there. You're fascinated. You're interested. I told you would be.
But your questions are great as well. They're really interesting and they're open, so I can ramble on them.
And you're so well. This is what we want. It's open and conversation. So while I was reading Mask Revealed, right? I was reading Mask Revealed into tonight. I was laying in bed, and all of a sudden, who should appear in my book but Rob Roy? And I was like, is that the Rob Roy? Like, can I remember? What's his name? He didn't appear. Mention of him appeared in the book, sort of like a little cameo off thing of a historical figure. So I got up out of bed and I went running, and I got on the computer to look up Rob Roy, and yes, his last name was McGregor, which is the clan that you write about. And I asked Julia, because I was so thrilled. I don't have to, if this is a spoiler, I don't have to bring it up on the show. But I want to know how much in advance you plan to have him in there. And that has to be my perk. But she said she would be happy to answer that. And why, which is interesting, why she chose the clan McGregor as the clan she would write about.
Okay. No, Rob Roy. When you messaged me that, I'd actually forgotten that I'd put him in the book. This is very embarrassing. My readers will often say to me, "So why did you write that?" And I think, did I write that? I don't remember writing that. Because,
oh, you did.
Yeah, I'd forgotten. So I thought, I don't remember writing Rob Roy McGregor. So I went and looked it up, and yes, I did. But no, I only mentioned that because it was actually historical. That Balhaldy was elected the chief of the clan Gregor, but Rob Roy led the people at the 15. So I just mentioned it. I've actually been very reluctant to mention Rob Roy at all because he is incredibly famous, partly because Sir Walter Scott wrote the great novel about him, a couple of novels, I think, and then there was the Liam Neeson film, which was really, really great fun about him. And they've turned him into this great mythological hero that he actually wasn't. So I really didn't want to get in and destroy all that and detract from my McGregors.
Oh,
so,
it didn't. It was just like the mind making connections. You know how when the little lights go off and you're like, I never even thought about that. Like I
do actually mention him again in Alex's tale. I mention him in a bit more detail, not detail, but I mentioned a bit more about him and about some of contemporary views of him, which were not Sir Walter Scott's views. So when you get to that, you can let me know what you think when you read Alex's book.
I think it's like most figures out of history. They're just doing what they have to do in the time. They're not thinking, I'm this or that.
He was an interesting person in the word, when you say the word interesting, but he was interesting and he was very resourceful, but he wasn't a particularly nice character in a lot of ways.
Well, we had that discussion on Great Men and
so no, I'm not. I mean, he was very flawed, and he was an interesting person. And I mean, there's loads of. He's great for Scottish tourism, brilliant for Scottish tourism. Like great characters like that are.
Yes, and the storytelling is very important for years. So, but why the Clan MacGregor then?
Why the Clan MacGregor? So I was looking for. When I started writing, I thought, okay, so the part of Scotland, of the Highlands I knew the best was Loch Lomond. And that was probably because my family lived in Glasgow, and Glasgow, Loch Lomond is the nearest pretty gorgeous spot from Glasgow. And I'd been there a few times, so I knew what it looked like without having to do too much research on it, and I knew that there were places above. I'd walked the West Highland Way, which is, if you're a hiker and you come to Scotland, walk the West Highland Way. It's breathtaking. And it starts by going up and coming over the hills and seeing Loch Lomond from above. And I thought, great, because it's whole parts of it are remote. I mean, if you go to the southeast part of Loch Lomond, it's very touristy. But if you get above that, when the road stops and then you carry on walking, it's really peaceful and it's gorgeous. So I thought, right. And so I wanted clans that lived around Loch Lomond. So I got a clan map of Scotland and I had a look. And I researched a little bit into the different clans that lived around there. And the MacGregors were really perfect for what I wanted. First of all, they were a fragmented clan. So, like you said, when Balhaldy was elected in The Mask Revealed, right. He was elected by a few people. Half the MacGregors didn't even know what the hell that he'd been elected.
Yeah, they weren't happy with it.
Well, they didn't even know about it because they weren't a massive, great big clan that were all together. They were fragmented. There was a reason for that, which I'll say now. So you could be a chieftain of a small group of MacGregors, which is what I wanted, because I didn't want to say, hey, Alex MacGregor, the chieftain of the MacGregors, when in real life there was this other character. But because they were so fragmented, each fragmented section would have their own little chieftain.
So it gave you that little freedom to.
It gave me that freedom to.
Yeah.
To have that character.
Good searching. Good.
Yeah, and then they were renowned for being particularly ferocious, and they were employed as mercenaries by other clans and so on, and they were always ready for a fight. Again, due to their history, but I mean, the fact that they were renowned as being ferocious among Highlanders is pretty scary, really. So they had this real reputation. They were also known as the Children of the Mist, which sounds really romantic, and it's not at all. But they were known as the Children of the Mist because they had to be able to just dissolve fast if they needed to. And the reason for all that is because they were actually a proscribed clan. And that means that they were illegal. For many, many years, they were illegal. And the way that happened around them was that going back into the 1100s and 1200s, they fought on the wrong side, basically. And so they didn't have lands granted to them by the crown. So the lands that they had were lands that they fought for and won. And a lot of the other clans, they'd have a little bit of land granted to them by the crown, and then they'd go off and take other people's lands as well, and they'd fight backwards and forwards over it for centuries, and that was normal. But the MacGregors didn't actually have any legal lands at all. So they had to fight for everything. They were also in Loch Lomond, which, like I said, is not far from the lowlands and from Glasgow and other places. I mean, Glasgow wasn't a real place. It didn't really exist very much then. But what that meant was that when the MacGregors were fighting, or when they were doing the cattle raiding and things to survive, they impinged on the lowlands a lot. Now, at this period of time, like the 1500s, the king of Scotland he couldn't rule the Highlands at all. He had to just virtually give up because each Highland chief was God, and they ruled their own way, and they just ignored the king unless it suited them not to do so. They were just ungovernable. They were literally ungovernable, and you couldn't go up there and sort them out because there was no access into the Highlands. You had to know where you were going, and you had to know whose clan's land you're on. And then you're not really going to go up and say to the Campbells, hey, give me all your swords. And then 2,000 men go, right. And they were warriors. So he dealt more with the lowlands. And of course, the MacGregors caused a lot of trouble in the lowlands because they'd raid backwards and forwards over the Highland-Lowland border. So they became renowned then. So there was all sorts of different skirmishes. They had a lot of skirmishes with Clan Campbell, Clan Campbell annoyed an awful lot of different clans because they took a lot of lands and they toadied around the right kings and said the right things and became very, very powerful. And then there was another clan called I think you pronounce it the Cahoons, but I might be wrong here. So if you're
that's okay, we don't know.
Yeah, if you remember,
if you don't know, we don't know.
Yeah, I meant to look it up before I came on the show, and I've forgotten. It's spelled as Cahoon, but I'm pretty sure they're called the Cahoons. And so they were already at loggerheads with each other. They lived on next to each other, and there was a Highland hospitality thing that nobody ever broke, which meant that if you were out in the night and you turned up at a Highlander's home, it didn't matter who you were or where you were from, you could claim hospitality, even if you were a deadly enemy. And this was a survival thing because
right, yeah, nobody wants to be loved.
But you could claim hospitality from the clan, and you could stay there, and you would not be touched, no matter what. You would not be touched. Nothing would be stolen. You would be fed. Everything would be great, and then you could leave the next day, and that was fine. I mean, the massacre of Glencoe was a great example of that being broken. Which,
yeah,
go on.
It was, but to that point, to have that much integrity as a people, to be able to say, "Come in, and you're safe till you leave." That's a big thing.
And that stood on both sides, though,
Yes.
So anyway, the two MacGregors were stranded out at night on the Cahoons' territory, and they went and asked for sanctuary, and they said no. They refused it. So the two MacGregors went off and they killed one of the sheep and ate it on the land, and then sheltered as best they could, and went off. And the next day, this was discovered. And the Cahoons got hold of these two MacGregors and hung them. So this was a massive breaking. You just didn't do that.
No.
So the MacGregors then piled in, and went over there and killed some and so on. And the Cahoons, who were friendly with the King James of the time, then went to King James. They knew him well. He appreciated drama, so they went with lots of bloody shirts and wailing widows and things, and made a big complaint about him, and he gave them permission to carry arms and go and fight the MacGregors because he was already fed up with them anyway because they were causing so much trouble in the lowlands. And the MacGregors kicked hell out of them basically. So at this point, James said, "I've had enough of this," and he made the clan illegal. So what that meant was that the MacGregors had no right of law on any level. That anybody could go and kill a MacGregor, and they would be either. The law was either enforced or not enforced throughout the following 200 years, nearly.
So you took that into the novel and gave them a reason to fight.
Yes,
they had a reason to reunite. Fight. The history, using the history, that is, you're just so smart, Julia.
No, because they were just perfect. I read them and I thought, okay, so the Ferocious, they had small groups. They had nothing to lose.
And that's the kind of character you want to just, no, it was a perfect choice. It was.
And I mean, it did work briefly because when Charles I was beheaded and they were fighting for Charles II, the MacGregors fought for Charles II, and when Charles II became the king in 1660, he lifted the prescription on the MacGregors. So they were legal for 30 years, and then they were proscribed again by King William.
Yeah,
You know,
it's not
yeah,
always the good old days. Okay, it
no, it's not.
definitely wasn't the good old days for the MacGregors.
But they literally, I mean, the women could be branded on the face if they were married to MacGregors.
Oh,
The children were taken off them and sent to Ireland. And if the children tried to come home, if they were under 14, they were beaten and taken back the first time and hung the second. If they were over 14, they were just hung straight away. You know, it was really draconian. They weren't allowed to use the name. They weren't allowed to gather together. They weren't allowed to carry weapons. And I mentioned this, you know, and they just got on with it. I mean, they called themselves all sorts of different names. They didn't call themselves MacGregor. But the fact that there's so many MacGregors around now and they're still there shows how tenacious they were, because, you know, for 150 years they couldn't use their name, and yet MacGregor's all over the place.
They're all over the place.
Yeah. So
over here, over on this side too. There's a large number of MacGregors.
So that's why I used them, because I thought they were such an interesting clan, and I had a lot of sympathy for them, you know, because they were in a really difficult position. They had no choice, and they were given no choice. But
there's no safety, no security, no anywhere at any time. It's just for your families or for anything. So, I love them even more now. Go back. We're going to take this question from Brian, and then I want to talk about your website.
Okay.
I might be rebellious and go over the time. Okay. How do you keep track of all your tidbits of facts and historical events within the overall timeline of your novels? Pen and paper or computer?
I'm a pen and paper person I write my novels on the computer. When I started, I read an interview with Dorothy Dunnett, who I'm a great fan of, who writes incredibly complex historical fiction with the most extraordinary research. And she said that she kept an index card for every character in her books, and she would write things about them on the card. And I thought that was a great idea. So from the point of view of the actual characters, because there's about 200 characters in my books altogether, I have an index card for every one, and I write the basic things like what they look like and so on down. And then if something happens, like I suddenly mentioned that he's got a scar on his arm or something, I'll go in and I'll add it to the card, scar on his arm, because you do forget. You forget little things like that. You'll forget otherwise. With regard to
you forgot Rob Roy. So.
I forgot I'd mentioned him, yeah, but I haven't got him as a character because he's just mentioned. I'm just teasing you. And then some of the index cards I got a bit dilatory with them as time went on, and then suddenly went to look them up again and thought, oh no, I didn't write anything. But for the most part, that's a really good way of keeping track of your characters and making sure their eyes stayed the same colour right the way through and things like that. And the other way is, some of it is just sheer memory, because I actually live in that world now. At this point, I live there when I'm writing about them, so I don't necessarily need to remember generally little things that are going on. I do need to remember what colour the drawing room was, or the living, or the things like this, because I can't change the drawing room's colours or things like this. So I will write down little notes of somebody's house. I make plans of the house and what's where, and so that I can keep things like that in my head, because there's a lot. Yeah.
Well, you obviously have a good memory. Like speaking today, you remember a lot of the details of the history. So
yeah, because I live in
the period. And you've lived in it for a while now.
Yeah, I know.
It's good. It's good. Before we move on from the history, I just wanted to point out, I wanted to mention Julia's website. Today, I have scrolling. If you're watching, it's on the bottom there. If you're listening on any of the platforms now or later, it will be in the description of the show. And I'm also going to say that it is basically just Google JuliaBrannan.com, And on this website, honest, it's amazing. Aside from beautiful images of mauve heather on the mountains and lakes, which I'm like, I'm just going to sit here and look at these images. She has blog upon blog about historical locations, historical people, just research. She has obviously, she has to be a research hound. And then on top of that, there is her reference library. So all of the books that she has read in researching this.
Some of them,
are,
that's way out of date.
but still,
very out of date.
They're there. What you did wasn't extensive. Yes, Janice, I was going to ask that as well. Now, the question Janice would like to know, and I'm going to read the exact quote that, okay, so Janice wants to know, as a writer, how did you go about the blurb from Diana Gabaldon? And the blurb is this. And this is where here we go. Great accuracy and detailed research with a full-blooded gripping story running and sometimes leaping from page to page. Excellent read, and even better, the beginning of a series. So if you are writing a series from this timeline, and you are obviously going to be compared to the Outlander series, this is a great blurb. It made me look twice. Okay. Aside from being free, I was like, oh my. So how did you go about getting that connection made?
Well, first of all, I had a fan, a reader who used to make Outlander scarves. I don't know if she still does, but she used to make Outlander scarves. And because of that, Diana Gabaldon had followed her on Twitter. Diana doesn't follow many people on Twitter. She's got nearly 500,000 followers, but she only follows a couple of hundred people. And this fan of mine was telling me that my books were amazing, and she was going to meet Diana Gabaldon, and she wanted to give her some of my books. So I thought, okay, I mean, I don't think the woman's going to read them because she must get loads of requests like this. But I thought, what the hell? So I gave her some of the books, and she gave them to Diana. And of course, I just thought, well, she'll never read them. But what I did notice is, I mean, the way Twitter works, I don't know if you know that, but if you follow somebody, you can see their posts. If they put a tweet up, you can see it. But they can't see yours. I mean, they might see it.
No. It's your followers if you want to see what's happening to them.
Yeah.
But they're not following you, so they don't care.
They don't.
So they don't see it.
So what would happen is I would post something, and this fan of mine would retweet it, and then Diana might see it because she was following this person. And every time Diana retweeted one of my posts, I got a little spike in book sales.
Of course you would.
Ooh, this is nice. And then I had, I was posting up. I was about to start reading. I didn't read any of her books until after I'd finished my series. So the people who say I've plagiarized Diana and so on, I didn't.
No, there's no. They obviously didn't.
Yeah, but and I posted up. I was just about to start reading whichever book it was of Diana's, but I've been distracted by being invited out for the evening. And Diana posted underneath something on the lines of, "Oh, that's a feeble excuse. I'm about to start reading Mask of Duplicity now." And I thought, what? So, and I got this massive spike in sales of Mask of Duplicity. And so I thought, this is amazing. You know, she's read the book, or she was reading it. And then there was a writers' conference. There's a writers' conference that she usually presents at. And it's about 30 miles away from one of my friends who lives in Canada. So I decided to go to the writers' conference and learn some things about writing, hopefully. And when I was there, I thought, wouldn't it be great if I could somehow get very friendly with Diana Gabaldon and then ask her if she'd follow me on Twitter? Because if she follows me, then she'll see all my posts and she might retweet more. And I thought, I don't know. I'm not a mercenary person, you know. I don't do this sort of thing. Anyway.
It's that question behind networking, right? That we all.
Yeah, I know, but I'm not like that. Anyway, so the weekend was very interesting. But I didn't get to see her, and I didn't get to be friendly with her and so on. So on the last evening, I just shot over and I had a chat with her, and we got on really well. And I said, thank you. She'd read my book, and she said, yeah, she'd really enjoyed it, and she intended to read the others. And then I said, I was hoping to get friendly with you so that, and then ask you to follow me on Twitter, but I'm not very good at being slimy like that. So would you just follow me on Twitter, please, and then retweet my thing? And she did, and I was really surprised. I didn't think she'd do it, and she actually followed me. And after that, we had a few direct messages, and we got on quite well together. And she agreed to do she said she'd do a review. I said I had a book pub promotion coming, and if she would mention my book on her book pub, it would make a big difference. And she did that whole review for me. And sent it to me, and I was blown away by that. I mean, that was such a nice. She's a really kind person. She's lovely, very interesting to talk to. I met her since as well. We had met last year and had lunch together. She's just really, really nice, genuine person, and she will help people if they are genuine people as well.
Well, that's it. And you're obviously genuine. And the moral of this story is to have fans who make scarves for other fandoms.
Yeah, it was lovely of her to do that. But I don't know. I mean, I think it was just sheer good luck. And I mean, I'd always joked that if I could get Diana Gabaldon, because people were comparing it to Outlander, obviously it's about the same time period. But I joked about getting Diana Gabaldon, and I never, ever, ever dreamed it would happen. And then to write such a review as that, I mean, my God, I nearly died when I read it. So it's helped me get a lot of readers. Yeah, it really has. It's been fantastic. So but I think the moral is just be cheeky. I mean, if you say to somebody,
yes,
will you do this? I mean, if they might say no, get lost. But if you never ask them or you never,
and it's not like they were.
Them.
No, they're people and they have lives and they get pestered a lot. But if they do say no, it's not like they're part of your social scene anyway. So nobody has to know. Don't take it personally.
Exactly. Yeah.
So obviously, as you stated, there are a lot of comparisons between you and Outlander. People are going to do that simply because it's the same time in history type of thing.
Yeah.
And my husband will do it because it's women writing perfect lines for men to say and then making his life difficult. So he'll find that comparison. So how do you feel when people make that comparison?
It depends on how it's being made. I mean, there's an awful lot of. Overall, it's been great because people will compare them and say, "Oh, I really loved it. It gives me a different viewpoint on it because I'm not writing time slip and my portrayal of Bonnie Prince Charlie is very different to hers as well." So overall, it's been great, and not many people write about that time period. So there aren't that many authors writing about it, and she is the most successful and most famous one. So you're always going to get that comparison. Where it's annoying is when I get the odd person who seems to think that I'm trying to set myself up as being better than Diana, so I'm a rival.
Well, it's everything's competitive to some people, right? They can't imagine that you're writing about the same. I mean, how many stories do we have about, the Old West or World War II, or it's one that most people don't write about. So it's more obvious, but it's a different take on the story. Like I did while reading, I think it was Mask Revealed, think, oh, this is a very different Prince Charles. Prince Charlie, he's completely different than the way he is portrayed in the Outlander series. So
in the TV series, definitely, yeah. I mean, the TV series.
Yeah, no. I'm just, no. Very.
But I think it's some people because Diana Gabaldon has got incredibly loyal fans, which is wonderful. They're really loyal to her, and some of them see me as though I'm trying to push her off her pedestal. I don't know. It's strange, as though there can only be one person. And I'm thinking, it's not like
Highlander. There can only be one.
Yeah, it's not like
Highlander.
I mean, if you make Ford cars and I make, Vauxhall cars, then we're in competition because you're only going to buy one car every 10 years or something. But you're not going to buy one book. So we're not in competition with each other.
No, not with real readers. And it's best for writers to network and to work together and to go. I mean, that's why you have book festivals. And that's why if everybody was in competition of each other, it just it just wouldn't work. You wouldn't get nobody out there.
There is a feeling, some people think I'm plagiarizing it because I think I wrote about, I can't remember the thing. I wrote about a duel. There's a duel in The Mask Revealed. And I've had a few people say, oh, well, it's exactly the same as the one, some duel in Diana Gabaldon. And I'm like, well, first of all, I hadn't read the series at that point or watched it, so I didn't know what it was. But also, the duel was a really common way of two idiotic gentlemen settling an issue, and they'd go and kill each other over ridiculous things. And it happened a lot. So it would be a bit like me and you both writing a book about pub life and having a fight in the pub, which is common. And then someone saying, oh, you've just plagiarized her because she had a fight in her pub as well. And I think it's some of it's people not understanding that these things were common events then. So a lot of books might write about a duel. It doesn't mean it's you've just copied the person. It
is just, some people are like that themselves. So that's why.
But you're always going to get that.
Yeah. And you can't, you have to sort of build a skin up for that, right?
Like, because it's mostly, I mean, I would imagine that when Tolkien wrote his books about, the Lord of the Rings, it was a thing in its own right about the elves and the dwarves and so on. Right, so if anybody else then writes a fantasy book about elves and dwarves, somebody's going to say you're plagiarizing Tolkien, even if it's very different.
Yeah, no, that
because he set the standard. And Diana she set the standard in a way for these books because she's so famous. And then there's the series as well, which has made her even more famous.
But the one thing I would like to, the only magic in your books are the love between the characters. There's no standing stones or whatever. So, and here he is to plead his case. My husband, get me a proper kilt, and I'll follow your orders to the letter. I don't believe that that's going to happen. So, but he's made that promise, so I'm going to go get a proper kilt.
You go get a proper kilt. Yeah, it would be about £500 very well spent
to get my way. Oh yes. And Brian says fan is short for fantastic. And in your case,
no, fanatic. No,
fanatic.
Right,
yeah. See, Brian, I always read things. I read it very nicely. But Brian, we'll have to discuss this later, Brian.
No, it is actually. He's right. It is short for fanatic. And some people are, they're fanatic. I've got fanatical readers about my books as well. And it's a compliment. But it can be difficult.
Well, just don't make any wrong moves with those characters because you'll get told. You probably already have been told.
Yeah. I won't spoil. I nearly gave you a big spoiler then, and I won't. But I've been.
I read beyond spoilers, but it's the rest of the world. Like if I can't take it anymore, I will read the end of the book and then calmly go back and see how it got there. I don't care what happens. Just, it's the whole story.
I never do that.
There's been a few. The last Harry Potter, I was like, I needed to know who died. And so I could go on. Susan says, I enjoyed hearing about all the ways Julia did her research and the history of the McGregors.
Oh, thank you. Well, there's a lot more about the history. In Alex's book, The Highlander's Tale, I do talk a bit more about the history because they're telling, stories about what happened and different things. So there is more about the McGregor history in the Highlander's Tale.
Okay. I've been hearing about all this rebellion and, just doing what you need to do to survive. And we are a little over time, but there's nobody after me. So do you have another 10 minutes, Julia? So that
if you want to.
We could go through a couple more things because I definitely want to ask you. Okay. You were in England, right? When you decided to move to Scotland, and all of a sudden you just picked up your entire life and moved to Scotland, rural Scotland, as a matter of fact. What about that country made you make that step?
Right. I actually moved from Wales to Scotland because I was in Wales for 20 years before I moved here. But okay, so my mum was a Scot, very avid Scot. And when she was living in England, my dad was English. She was living in England when she was pregnant with me. And she wanted me to be a Scot, so she was going to go to Scotland to have me. She was going to have me at my uncle's. She was going to move up there for that, so I would be Scottish. And she got sick. She couldn't do it. So I was born in England, and my mum in Manchester, and my mum conveniently ignored that and just brought me up as a Scot. So I was brought up as a little girl as a Scot, and there was a big family feud going on. I won't get into my family history, but there's a big family feud going on between the Scots side of the family and the English side of the family. And I was just the Scot, one of the Scots, classed as I was my granddad's favourite granddaughter because I was the Scottish granddaughter, So I just didn't even think about it. And I actually went to school at 5 with a broad Glaswegian accent, which...
So I won't mention who, but you sort of have a connection with one of the characters in your book, kind of, with your history and hers.
Yeah. Well, I do with a few of them actually, but yeah, I do. And so anyway, I went to. So I always had this. I always thought of myself as a Scot. Always thought of myself as a Scot. And that's my mum gave me my love of Scotland, and we used to go up and visit my uncles and my aunts and visit, and it just always felt like home. But I just never thought I'd be able to move there as I grew older because I needed to work, And I've done all sorts of jobs. I mean, civil service, and then I've been a teacher. I've done a lot of different things. And then I met my now ex-boyfriend, but I met my boyfriend who lived in Wales, and I ended up moving from a very large council estate in Manchester to rural Wales. So I lived in the Brecon Beacons in South Wales for 20 years. And during that time, my books finally took off. So all of a sudden, I was geographically independent because I could write my books anywhere. And then an opportunity arose. An incredible opportunity arose to move to Scotland. And I went for it. Why not? I mean, I moved up.
And now you don't have to drive 4 hours to do your research. You can have, they'll come and have their sword fights right in the back garden.
Yeah, but it's also, where I live is incredibly beautiful. I mean, I live in Aberdeenshire. I live in a log cabin near a river in the middle of nowhere. I mean, it's so peaceful. It's so beautiful and quiet. And it's very conducive to writing, and I'm very, very happy here. I feel at home. Ironically as well, my clan is the Gordon clan, and I live smack in the middle of Gordon country, and I do feel very much at home here. I love the West Coast very, very much as well, and I would have chosen probably to live there primarily, but now I'm here. I'm really happy because there aren't as many midges here, and it's lovely. I've made friends. Yeah, I miss my friends in Wales, and I miss my friends in Manchester, but I go back to see them.
But you came home.
Occasionally. But I feel at home here. I've always felt at home. Yes. Every time I've gone to Scotland and I've been here, I've felt at home, more at home than I'd have in England and Wales. And I think it's just because of the way I was brought up and, the connections I had with Scotland from that. So
through the family.
Yeah. So that's why. And I would probably have a very strong Scottish accent now, except if I'm in Glasgow for a couple of hours, I'll have a Glaswegian accent again. But here, the Aberdeenshire people have a completely different accent. And so I've not picked it up because it's really different.
So I may be asking you a question sometime about the Glasgow accent, as a matter of fact. But I just before we say goodbye, I don't want to say goodbye. You need to come back, okay? I will bring you back.
All right.
You do have a contemporary novel out as well, The 75% Solution. Have you ever thought about writing? It sounds really interesting. Have you thought about writing more contemporary, or because you don't have enough on your plate? But
I wrote. I had just got the idea for a 75% Solution. I actually wrote. I wrote the first three books of the Jacobite Chronicles, and then I got an agent. Finally, I got an agent. This is before self-publishing, and I outlined to her the vague idea I had for this 75% Solution, and she said to me, "Write that, because if I can't get your first historical book published, the others are a waste. So write your contemporary one. So I wrote it. And then she couldn't get me published at all. And then we had the big credit crunch in Britain, and nobody was getting published anywhere. But that book was just sitting there then at that point, the contemporary fiction. And I finally published it because I thought, well, I might as well, after I published the first 4 of Jacobite Chronicles,
Right.
I might as well stick this out. It's sitting there. I have actually already written another one, which would be called The Bigger Picture. And it's almost like a series of stories of people in an art gallery. And I reread it not long ago and thought, no, I need to rewrite it. I'm not happy with it as it is. I need to rewrite it a bit. And I've just never got round to it because my first love is historical. I love historical fiction. And very few people will cross genres.
Well,
so
because once you
historical, they won't read it.
Yeah, no, they brand you as something. It's very difficult to go to another genre. It doesn't mean you can't, and some fans will follow you, but
some have read it, and the people who've read it really enjoyed it.
Yeah, there's a lot of good reviews on it.
Yeah, but it's just that I don't mind because my primary love is historical fiction.
Yes,
definitely.
So there is one out there that may show up, but you're quite content writing your historical fiction.
Yeah, I'd have to have the time to be able to rewrite the bigger picture. I'm not happy with it as it is, and I won't publish it if I'm not happy with it. So I need to read. I like the basics. I just need to comprehensively rewrite the way it's written. That's all.
Okay, I'm going to put one more comment up from my husband and end it on this. Honestly, I only want a kilt so I don't have to wear underwear or pants. Is that the proper way to wear a kilt as well? So there is a question in there. As far as your knowledge, is that the proper way to wear a kilt, Julia?
Yes.
That is, he would get into this, but this is not the point, David. You can't argue it now. You said the reason for getting the proper kilt was to do what I said.
If you're going to get the proper kilt is not the one that you're buying now. The proper kilt is the Fellamore, which is a great big piece of cloth, like the one that if you watch Outlander, Sam Hewen, that's the proper kilt, not the nice one. So they were showing their bits all over the place. In fact, Maggie Craig, who I mentioned before, who's a really great writer, and she's written 2 books, non-fiction books about the 45, and they are excellent. They are very, very readable. I would recommend them. And one is called Damn Rebel Bitches, and it's about the women of the 45. Yep, go on. And that's quite famous, actually. And it's an excellent book, which I read. And then the other one is about the men, and it's called Bare-Arsed Banditti. And that's because they were called bare-arsed bandits, because the kilt would float about and they weren't bothered. They showed everything. So your husband can do that, but he might get arrested.
He says Hazu. He's like, no, this does not give you purpose. Keeping clothes on him is not easy. Okay.
Okay.
I'm going to try those books. So, Julia, thank you so much for being here with us today, and it's so great to meet you and have this talk. Like, I'd love to have another talk.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it, and I was quite nervous because I didn't know how it would go, but I've really enjoyed it. Yeah, you were right. It's great.
It's fun. And for the rest of you out there, I will see you next week. Thank you for joining us, and may your coffee be hot and your stories sweet.
And your tea should be with milk.
And your tea should be with...
authors.
Okay. I take my tea with milk, so I feel good about that. Okay. Thanks for listening, everyone. Take care.
You are listening to Fika with Vicky on United Public Radio, 107.7 and 105.3 from New Orleans.